Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Ricky Bentley. I'm the program manager at Connecticut Land Conservation Council, CLCC for short. We're the umbrella organization for Connecticut's land trusts, and we support your work through policy advocacy, funding, technical assistance, and capacity building programs like this one. Um, Today's presentation is the first installation of a four-part webinar series to help land trusts meet their financial goals. If you don't already, I encourage you to subscribe to our e-news. It's a great place to learn about all of our upcoming programs. Today's webinar is titled Fundraising 101, Acquiring and Keeping Your Donors. A few quick housekeeping notes. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A. Sharon will answer questions throughout. We'll try and keep up to date with the chat. To help preserve bandwidth, we ask that you stay muted and keep your video off until the Q&A or until the end of the session. And we are recording. We'll share the recording and slides with you in the next couple of days. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce today's presenter, Sharon Danosky. Sharon is a seasoned nonprofit strategist and board source certified governance trainer with over 35 years of leadership, consulting, and fundraising experience, known for helping organizations build capacity, drive change, and achieve lasting impact. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Ricky. And hi, everyone. So glad you could join today to hear Fundraising 101. What we're going to talk about today is a little bit of context of fundraising so that what we are learning can be put into like the bigger picture of how to really motivate, reach, and connect with your donors so that they become sustaining donors who give to you generously and significantly over time. And I'm going to start with the art and science of fundraising. You know, we always think of fundraising in the context of current times. For someone who actually, and what's nice, Ricky said, I've been 35 years. Clearly, I need to update my bio. It's really been more like for over 40 years. And I have seen a lot of changes in fundraising, but not changes in a lot of the fundamentals. So I want to start with a story. 1794 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, there was a young boy who slipped beneath the water's surface and was rescued by one of the bystanders, Dolphin Goller. Um, this incident would spark a town-wide philanthropic effort to recognize Goller for his bravery. Four townsmen lobbied a statewide life-saving charity, writing up an account of the rescue, and before long, Garla was awarded a sizable award of $10 from the Humane Society of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This organization was established in 1786 to promote the rescue and resuscitation of victims of drowning and other near-death circumstances. It was the organization's single largest award that year. Philanthropy, nonprofit organizations, giving, recognizing people who are making a difference is nothing new. It is as old as our history. And the basic premise is that people give to people. Philanthropy goes back, I mean, the earliest reference of philanthropy is over 2500 BC. Every single religion references philanthropy in some ways. In countries without a feudal system, community practice was very common, and organized philanthropy really grew in emerging democracies. We saw this so prominently in the United States in the 1700s. And when Alex de Tocqueville visited the United States, he noted how unusual it was how communities got together to help one another and really began that spirit of philanthropy here in this country. Who was the first fundraiser in this country? Ben Franklin. What did Ben Franklin do? He launched two capital campaigns, one for a library and one for a hospital in Philadelphia. Fundraising is nothing new. However, you know, how we need to look at raising money today is to get back to some of the basics and to look at building those relationships which yield long-term sustainable growth for your organization. I thought it'd be fun to look at total charitable giving in the US from the period 1980 to 2020. I do a number of capital campaigns, and every single campaign I've ever done, there is someone on the board who says, well, I don't think this is a very good time to launch a campaign. I want you to look at when the real peak in fundraising happened. Right here, right after 9/11, right here after the Great Recession, and how about right here, after, right during and after the pandemic? In the worst of times is when philanthropy thrives. I also want to share with you Giving USA 1983 through 2023. And here is where, how giving is broken down. 82% in 1983 came from individuals, 6% from corporations, 6% from bequests, 6% in foundations. This hasn't changed much in 2023. The only difference is the increase in foundations. And that increase in foundations is really because many of those foundations are what we call family foundations, where the head of the family, whoever that might be, makes the decision along with other family members where to give the funds. And a lot of times, if you can meet with the family or the head of the family, and that family member can take out a checkbook and write a check, that is giving much more as an individual than it is giving as a foundation, where in the classic sense you have to write a grant, it goes before a board, they make their decision. A lot of family foundations don't act that way. They act more like individuals. So when you really look at this, most of the money comes from individuals. And figuring out how to raise money effectively from individuals is what really constitutes a strong fundraising program. I also want to share with you, and I'm going to take a little bit of my colleague's thunder because he usually says this, but I'm doing this first session, so I get to say it first. So I want you to look at the breakdown of it. Of course, unfortunately, in 1983, environment and animals wasn't even on this chart. Now you're at 3%, but I want you to look at religion. 63% here. Now that's dropped considerably to 24%. Um, you know how people, you're always so, we shouldn't ask for so much money. We can't ask for them again. We can't ask people to give too much. How frequently does religion ask for money? In some cases, every week. And who gets the lion's share of fundraising? All right, Paul, I stole your thunder. Paul Dunn, everyone. He's going to be giving the next session. So just wanted to give him a shout out. So let's talk, why are people philanthropic, or why do people give? People give because they want to make an impact. They want to make a difference in this world. They believe in your cause. They believe in your organization. They believe in the people who do the work. They believe in you. And last, because someone asked them. So I did a little bit of research, and the Charity Aid Foundation surveyed over 700 donors to learn more about what makes people give money to charity. 96% of people give because they feel a sense of duty to give back to society, playing their top part in tackling inequality. And that is really just that sense of altruism. 96% give for that reason. 75% give because they feel passionately about a cause. 71% are motivated because of their faith. 61% had a personal experience, or a child or a family member or something that caused them to decide to give. I want all of you to think about something and to go home and think about it more. Why are you working or volunteering for your land trust? What motivates you to do this work every single day? For those of you who are paid to do this work, you know you could make more money doing something else, but you love it and you're happy and you feel fulfilled. So think of those factors that influence you to get up every morning and to do the work you do, and why you love it. And then think about your donors. And those same motivating factors are present in your donors. And you need to be able to tap into that. We call this donor centered fundraising. A lot of times, most organizations end up doing what I refer to as tactical fundraising. How many appeals are we sending out a year? What events are we doing a year? What peer-to-peer fundraising strategies are we going to employ? It's all about the tactics. I'm going to suggest that instead of taking a tactical approach, you take an approach that is centered around your donors and why they are giving to you. It puts your donor at the center of your fundraising efforts. Your donor has the good of the community at heart. That's why they're giving. Your donor plays an essential vital role in your mission success. Your donor trusts that when they give you money, you're going to do good work with that money. And that your donor trusts that you're conducting yourself ethically and efficiently. That's the donor at the center of your organization. And quite frankly, for the majority of nonprofit organizations, they would not exist if it weren't for the donor. And yet, a lot of times, many nonprofits kind of put the donor off to the side as if they're great, they're wonderful people, but here's the work we're doing, instead of inviting the donor in to the heart of all of your appeals, all of your fundraising, all of your philanthropic efforts. What is important to reach out to a donor is to start with a vision of how the world would be if you were successful in your mission. If you were able to conserve and protect and educate and make more people feel the value of the open space and land around us, what a better world that would be. That's the world that your donor wants to share. And that's the world that you need to talk about over and over and over again with your donors. Instead, I think a lot of our appeals talk about the accomplishments of what we've done and how many acres we've saved and all of this, but doesn't share that vision and that humanity that is at the core of that donor's heart. You take that vision and you translate that vision into what we call, in fundraising terms, a case for support. The narrative you share with your donors, what you are going to do with the funds you raise, how you are going to make a difference because your donor is giving to you. You paint a picture where the donor is part of the solution, where the donor is walking side by side with you, hand in hand with you to make a difference. You minimize the information about your organization and your methodology and how you're doing it, and you stick with the humanity, the impact, the vision, the urgency of raising funds. And in that context, you share data. But you don't share data just about your organization, but you share data from the perspective of the donor being able to do something significant and impactful. Psychologically, the most effective appeal focuses on evoking empathy and emotion through personal stories. These stories highlight the impact that a single individual can have and creates a sense of urgency. More people are likely to give based on feelings rather than facts or purely logical arguments. The donor gives with his or her or their heart. They don't give with their head. The head might come in terms of how much they're going to give, but whether or not to make that decision is an emotional decision that you need to be able to understand and tap into if you want your donor to give to you. So you focus on the heart versus the head. The heart gives you the optimum engagement, an emotional connection which can result in increased engagement, loyalty, long term support. It's easy to understand and leaves a lasting impression, and it elicits in a quick action. You can create a call to action when you have touched someone's empathy and emotion. um, the head provides good validation. Evidence-based narratives help build credibility and trust. Long-term impact, donors want to know what their money has done. So you reach out with your heart, and then you say thank you with your heart and your head. And that's how you build that donor relationship. There are some key psychological elements in a charitable appeal. Number one, empathy. When you are appealing to your donors, you need to share a relatable story about a specific person facing hardship or whatever, or an ideal which can trigger empathy and motivate someone to give. People need to connect with the people you're talking about. People connect a lot better to people than an organization, which is kind of this gray matter with all your data and statistics. But how is it affecting an individual? How are you relating what you're doing to an individual? Visual imagery. Use powerful image that depicts the issue, that can significantly increase the emotional impact. There always has to be a sense of urgency. And there is. I mean, for every single one of you who is working in the land trust community, you all know what the urgency is. Aaron last year created this wonderful report about the impact of land trusts in the state of Connecticut. And not only the impact of land trusts in the state of Connecticut, but what's looming ahead of us. You can use any of that information in any of your appeals to connect that human story with that sense of urgency. Sometimes social proof, highlighting the actions of others, and that's why when we're looking at appeals, we often say, because of your generosity and the generosity of so many of your neighbors, friends, and community members, so that this feels like a community effort, which it really is. And gratitude, expressing sincere appreciation for what your donors have given. And we will talk a lot more about that gratitude, because that is one of the things we don't do enough in the nonprofit element. So when you're looking at any kind of an appeal, and this is an appeal whether or not you are doing an event, you're writing a direct appeal letter, whether you are asking for a major gift, or whether you are, doing any kind of peer-to-peer online giving. The first is the problem you're addressing. You need to make it seem real and relevant to your prospective donors. They need to feel and understand it. You need to speak in layman's term. You know, most lay people don't know what fee property is, and many don't know what conservation easements are. Don't use those terms in an appeal. Talk about the land, talk about open space. You need to talk about the solution you're proposing to address the problem with your donor's help, and specifically how they can help, the purpose, and the amount of the gift you request. A lot of this is best framed from the perspective of a story. Storytelling is the most effective way to communicate. Storytelling makes it real. Storytelling helps put your donors in the shoes of the person whose story is being told. Storytelling makes things come alive. So I want to share with you a little bit of a diagram of what we call the hero story. We start here. And notice this is somebody walking. The hero is introduced, whoever that hero might be. That hero encounters a problem, and the hero can't really solve the problem, and the hero becomes despondent or lost. Then the hero encounters you, and the hero's life is saved, the problem is resolved, the hero is reborn, the hero is grateful and shares his knowledge about you and the difference you made in the hero's life. I want to give you kind of a real life example of this. So I was doing some work for the Sawmill River Audubon. I was for a couple of years during COVID. I ended up writing their annual appeal letters, which I don't do very often, but which I have fun with. And I always like to interview someone who has encountered some kind of an interaction with the organization. In this particular instance, I was introduced to this woman who was in her late 80s, I want to say, and was in a wheelchair. When she was in high school, she was an avid, avid birder. In college, she met her husband, who was an avid hiker. The two of them got married and they started hiking all over the world. This was their life. I mean, they were both scientists. They would do a lot of research while they were hiking. They had a baby, and when the baby was 6 months old, the baby was strapped to them, and they went hiking in some country up some mountain. It was just an amazing story. And both of their children ended up becoming environmentalists. So, as the woman aged, she began to get arthritis. And so her hiking was reduced, and she had to use canes, and it was more difficult. And finally, by her 70s, she was in a wheelchair and devastated. And she kept looking for, the accessible trails. And she said it was so discouraging because they were so short. They were like a quarter of a mile. And she'd go out and she'd come back, and she just was never enjoying it. And the Sawmill River Audubon had an incredible accessible trail. And she read about it, reached out to them, and they met her there. And she went on the longest hike that she had done in 10 years. And it totally revitalized her and revitalized her soul. And she keeps going back there. Telling that story in that letter increased their response rate and the giving 35% over what they had raised previous years when they talked about all the things their organization had done. People related to her, people understood what the difference was meant. That's how you need to appeal to your donors, through some kind of an emotional connection. So, the important points to remember: focus on one story. Don't use several stories. Focus on one story that has an impact. Be authentic. Get rid of words like the best, the greatest, the most wonderful. They just don't smell like they're being sincere. Be clear. Explain how contributions will be used and the direct positive effect they will have. Create a sense of urgency. Help donors understand how an immediate gift will make a difference. And clearly state what you want to do, like donate now. Um, so before I go on to the more nitty gritty, anyone have any comments or thoughts or anything they want to share at this time? So Emily asks, do you use these same strategies for individual donors and corporate sponsors? Yes and no. I mean, when you look at it, when you're trying to get a corporate sponsorship, who are you talking to? You're talking to a person. So, don't negate the story just because it's a corporate sponsor. It's going to be a little differently buttoned up when you do it, but you still have to appeal to that donor's different desire to make a difference in the world. Even a corporation, they're not just giving out money willy nilly. And the more a donor knows that the donor is having an impact, the happier they are to give and the more they will give. So, yes, reinforce those kinds of stories with your corporate donors as well. Anyone else have anything that they want to add, contribute, say at this point? All right. Well, don't hesitate to put anything in the chat, definitely. So, I want to talk a little bit about acquiring, retaining, and upgrading your donors. So, for any of you who have ever been to any of my workshops before, you know I usually end up liking to share this pyramid. So, this is the basic gearing pyramid of a funds development program. This is all you need to know if you want to build a fundraising plan. Of course, it probably needs a little bit of explanation, right? So what we have here is the lower level, the base, is the base of donor support. And this is where you have donor acquisition. People come in through events, direct mail, constituency building, social networks, however you build that base. The base is 90% of your donors, but only 10% of your money. Only 10% of your money. This is not where your money is. The second tier is the renewal and retention. In my opinion, this is the most important tier of the pyramid. If you don't get that donor and have that donor renew, all you're doing is building a revolving door. You need to retain that donor because you can't get here to a major gift without retention. And here is where 10% of your donors give 90% of your funds. A lot of times when I present this in front of boards and I say, where do you want to be working? Every single board will say, well, we want to work here. You can't get there unless you do your work here. And finally, the last is legacy giving. And technically, legacy giving really comes from here, not necessarily major donors. It comes from loyal donors who have given to you many times over the years. So you really have to build this second tier of the pyramid. So when you're building a good fundraising plan, the first thing you've got to have is a good pipeline. You've got to have a pipeline of donors coming into you, or you're not going to be able to get to any of the peers. Then the next piece is the retention, and then there's major giving. So you want to move to a donor-focused approach. Well, how do you do that? First is, do you know who your donors are? Do you know why they give to you? Do you know what will spark their interest? Do you know why they keep coming back? How many conversations have you had with your donors and asked those questions? What made you make your first gift to us? Why do you renew your gift to us? What is it that you love about our land trust? Listen to your donors. Every time you are on a trail, leading a hike, run into a donor, have a conversation so that you begin to understand why your donors are giving to you. When you understand why they're giving to you, then you are going to appeal to their interests a lot better. The pipeline will come from a number of ways. Online or mail acquisition. You know, you can always purchase direct mail lists. I don't really advocate that because they're costly and you really don't make any money on a list, but you do get some constituents. I will say direct mail is having a minute. It's actually having a little bit more than a minute. And the recent what is the recent generational giving report, I think it was done by AFP, shows that there is more response to direct mail, particularly from Gen Z and millennials, than there is necessarily from Gen X. So Gen Z is very much into mail. They don't want to write a check. They want you to clearly either have a QR code or where you can go online to text or give, but they're reading direct mail more than they're reading anything online. So it's an important thing to think about. Certainly, fundraising events is one way. If you have a fundraising event, you need to follow up with that donor and not have it be a one and done like so many events are. People who want to give you third party events, your volunteers, your members, your boards, cultivation events, or mission oriented activities is another way that you can build your pipeline. A lot of you do educational programming. You'll do talks. You'll do hikes. On specific topics. Make sure you capture their names and emails, and if possible, their addresses. That's how you're going to build your pipeline. Retention is through your annual fund, your direct mail renewal, your e-giving renewal, returning event participants. Make sure that, as I said, they're not one and done. Personal requests for donations, asking donors to upgrade their gifts, recurring or monthly contributions, and making sure you have good stewardship activities. We'll talk about this in more depth. And major gifts, major individual donors, corporate support, lead donors, foundation grants. Acquiring new donors. Where do new donors come from? Your board members, your volunteers, your staff, existing donors, friends, acquaintances, hosting private gatherings. I would say land trusts have the biggest advantage of any nonprofit organization. You have land. You can invite people to take a walk. So you have such an advantage to getting people out, to meeting people, to having activities which people love. Fundraising events and mission specific events where people can learn about your organization. Social media, grassroots events, corporate sponsors. If any of you have a number of corporations, ask to do lunch and learns at their facilities. Social and civic groups asked to speak in front of the Lions, the Rotaries, the Elks, garden clubs, libraries. Um, you can go to farmers markets on Saturday mornings. You can talk to your local chamber of commerce. You can go to PTO organizations and talk about your land trust, religious organizations. These are all ways that you can network and you accumulate lists and names and you add them to your database. This is how you begin to build new donors. It's not staying in your office, it's being out in the community, being part of the community, making sure the community is seeing you, they know who you are, and gathering the names, sharing your newsletter, sharing information about what you're doing, and yes, eventually asking for contribution. How do you solicit potential donors? Well, you really look at the ladder, what I call the ladder of effectiveness. The very best way to solicit someone is personally, face to face, either a team of two or one person. If you have 500 donors, that's not possible. So then you need to kind of tier your donors in terms of who you might be approaching personally and who you might be approaching, um, through another means. Sometimes a personal letter, with telephone follow up can be an excellent way. Um, I say an impersonal letter, and what I mean by that is every impersonal letter needs to be personally addressed. You don't ever send a dear friend letter, dear member letter, anything like that. It'll go right in the trash. So, it's dear Sharon Danosky. Um, and then you can have the standard copy, obviously, for every letter. A personal letter would say, dear Sharon, it was great to meet you on the trail last week. The impersonal letter would not do that, it would go right into your story. Certainly, there are giving days, there are local give locals that your community foundations hold, and then there's Giving Tuesday, another great way to make sure you're out there. Peer to peer fundraising is excellent. Crowdfunding, a fundraising benefit, a special event, social media advertising. This is the absolutely least effective way of soliciting someone. And so you go from the best down to the least. So those are how we go about acquiring our donors, I want to spend a little time on retention. So, retention is all about thanking your donors and stewarding your donors along the way. So, why do we lose our donors? Well, there are two good reasons. They should suffer financial hardship, they die, move, or face tragedy. There is nothing you can do about that. And quite frankly, that is about 15 to 20% of your list will fall off because of these two things. The other you can do something about. And I want you to kind of go through this with me. They forget, they get distracted, they lose interest. You mail to them too often, you don't mail often enough. Let's face it, you can't win that one. And then listen to the last four. You don't listen. You treat them like a stranger. They feel unappreciated. You make them mad. They've grown other interests. It sounds like a relationship that's gone bad. And that's exactly what it is. It's a relationship that has gone bad. Understand your donors and how they give. So when you go back to your own shops, I want you to look and say, how many donors give to you annually? What is the frequency? Once a year, twice a year, or more often? How many give on a monthly basis? What is the date of their most recent gift? What is the level of giving? How many give 1,000 or more a year? 500 to 1,000. What is their range of giving, and how many are in each of that category? Is there a pattern of the gift being repeated but not given, upgraded over the years? So is someone giving you $100 and that's all they've given for the past 10 years and has never been motivated to give you more? Is there a regular request made that the gift be upgraded? Do you ask them to ever give you more? Do your records indicate the names of donors who consistently give to the year fund, to the annual fund, or make special purpose capital or endowment gifts throughout the year? Is there a specific person that they relate to who might be named as a solicitor? And this last one, how many of your donors do you keep year after year after year? You know, it's funny sometimes when I go in and do an assessment, some organizations will say, well, it's all right. They give like every year and they might skip a couple of years and then they might come back a year. That's not what you want. You want your donor giving to you every single year. I mentioned that about 15 to 20% of your donors will fall off each year for a very good cause. Here's the problem. The average nonprofit organization typically loses 57% of their donors every single year. How do you think Starbucks would feel if they lost 57% of their customers every single year? Not too good. So, what is your rate of retention? How are you retaining your donors year after year? Because if you don't retain them, you certainly can't upgrade them. And if you can't upgrade them, they'll never become a major donor and they'll never be part of that 90% of your money coming from 10% of your donors. What you want is that 10% to be a large number so that the money you're raising becomes larger. This is a gift table that I often use when I'm working with a client. And I like to see, and you just kind of start this at whatever your highest, if your highest gift is $5,000, start it at $5,000. But what you want to do is look at this and see, all right, here is where like the 90-10, 80-20 split is right around here, which means for this organization, a major gift is $1,000. And you can see 86 donors are giving them $338,000 out of the $460,000 they raise. 86. Now, unfortunately, this group went down because it was 379 and they had 95 donors, and now they only have 86 donors and they're 338,000. I want to know what happened to those other 9 donors. And I want to know why these donors have gone down. Now, a couple went up here, more went down here. So this is an organization that certainly is not in distress, but there are definitely some warning signs there that says, uh-oh, why aren't we keeping and upgrading our donors more than we should be? So, if you have a chance, go back and look at your donor list. Go back and look at your donor database and try to figure out what's happening in your organization. What do your numbers look like? Are they going up or are they you losing some of your donors? And while we're talking about acquiring new donors, half the time I can increase an organization's fundraising simply by going into their existing donor base, anywhere from 12 to 20%, just by going into your own donor database and getting your donors back before even having to worry about acquiring new donors. And I would say to you, if you are losing a fair number of your donors each year, then don't work on acquiring donors until you have your retention down, because you're going to just create a revolving door of donors. The key thing to keeping your donors is to show gratitude and appreciation for the gifts they're giving to you. So, how many of the following does your nonprofit do to thank your donors? I'm hoping not too many of you do a form letter, dear friend, or a postcard where you fill in the amount. I will tell you, yeah, probably at least 95 to 98% of nonprofits send out a letter that is personally addressed. Dear Sharon, thank you very much. So if you're doing this, you're kind of like already not in the competition. So if you don't have a good donor database, make sure you get one. If you're working off an Excel spreadsheet, make sure you get one tomorrow. One of the ones I really like a lot is Little Green Light. It's very inexpensive. It's like $39, $49 a month, and it does all the basics, and it's easy to use. You know, so in addition to a letter, do you make a phone call to your donors? When they give, do you write a personal handwritten note? Do you send them a text? Do you do an email follow up? The importance of staying in touch with your donors cannot be overemphasized. What donors have always wanted, um, you know, the fundraising effectiveness study is conducted regularly, and these are some of the findings. Number one, donors want to know that their gift was received and you were pleased to get it. 92% said this was critical. Number two, assurance that their gift was set to work as intended. And number three, that their gift made an impact. That's not a lot to ask. Thank you, we appreciate you. We've used your gift in the following manner. 6 months later, this is the difference your contribution made. Not a big deal. And this is what donors said if nonprofits did that. 87% said they would give to that organization again. And yet the typical nonprofit organization loses 57% of its donors. 64% said they would give more, and 74% would continue to give indefinitely. Really, this is the secret sauce. Thank you. Your work has been put to use as intended, and this is the impact it's had. It's not rocket science, it's just good stewardship. So let's put this to work. Your acknowledgement. Try to get it out within 24 to 48 hours. How do you let your donor know they received the gift? What information do you include that helps validate their decision? And how do you communicate authentically that you are truly appreciative of the gift? One of my all time favorite openings for an acknowledgement letter was, on behalf of all those who can't remember, thank you for remembering. Alzheimer's Association. What can you say that really comes from the heart that lets them know you appreciate it and how you're going to use this gift? What data can you provide them to say, this is how we're going to use your gift, and this is the difference it's going to make? And then, how do you let your donor know of the impact your gift had? I have one client who sends out a 1 page letter, back and front, twice a year, and the opening heading is, here's how your money was used. Simple. Lets them know their fundraising has consistently increased year after year after year. Now, the IRS requires the obligatory thank you. It's for every contribution, $250 or more needs to be acknowledged, and this disclaimer needs to be consistent with IRS regulation. No goods or services received for your contribution. If you're acknowledging a contribution through a fundraising event, you must insert the fair market value of the goods and services that the donor received in the letter. This is the basic. This is like ground level. You know, everybody does this. How do you differentiate your land trust? Doing thank yous well is so critically important. We used to say the thank you is the first step in the next solicitation because it truly is. It kickstarts the relationship, it increases donor retention, it certainly shows your organization in a very professional light. It builds your reputation. My gosh, we always get a thank you letter promptly from this organization. And as your mother says, it's the right thing to do. So, who, when, how, and follow up. So, think who will thank your donors. So, you send out that first obligatory letter. Is that from you as executive director, development director, whatever? Um, is it from a board member? When, how soon will they receive that first thank you? And then what about the second thank you? I know another organization, you know, every single time there's a board meeting, the first 15 minutes of that board meeting, they're on their phone calling every donor who made a contribution that month just to say thank you. And if they don't get the person on the phone, they leave a message. People listen to their messages. So will you send a handwritten card or note? Will you make a phone call? How will you do it? And the follow-up, how will you know their contribution has made a difference? So here's a sample acknowledgement plan, donors, tax receipt, thank you letter, handwritten note by executive director, phone call by board member, follow up in 6 to 8 months. The different levels amount when you do this. So you can create your own kind of grid. You will receive a copy of this deck, so you can just copy that and fill in your own timeline. In addition to the thank you, there are also additional strategies to foster long-term donor retention. Personalized communication, regular engagement. Um, One of the things, again, I really encourage land trusts to do is you go out on your properties, take pictures, you know, text those pictures to a group of donors. It takes you 5 minutes to do something like that. If you have a major donor, someone who just gave you five, ten, $20,000, the next time you're on the trail, take a picture and say, look at the difference you're making for our land trust. Just wanted to show you this picture. So take the time to do the little things that make a difference. I had a colleague, and she worked with youth at risk, and this one donor gave $10,000 for computers. She took a picture of the kids, their back, all working on the computers, and said, "Oh my gosh, look at the kids and the difference you've made in their lives." Bam, he sends another $10,000 in. That's the difference that you can make if you stay in touch with your donors. That's why we call this donor focused. And here are some other useful ways to stay in touch. Invite top donors to behind the scenes or VIP events. Invite them to preview a new property or trail before anyone else. Send personalized reports that show the specific impact of their donations, use storytelling, volunteer opportunities, invite some of your donors to clear a trail, or to pick blueberries or whatever it is. Invite them into your process. Create avenues for them to share their expertise, such as advisory boards or focus groups or lunch and learns. Bring your donors into your fold. And finally, document your impact. What have you achieved with your donor's gift? What data do you have that documents your achievements? How does that data tell a story? What else needs to be done? I found this impact report, Your Land Trust by the Numbers. This is from the North Olympic Land Trust. 25 conserved local farms, 4 conservation areas open to public access. This can just go out with a short letter and lets your donors know this is what we've done with your money. Remember to always keep the end game in mind. Connect with your donors. Connect your donors to your vision. Connect your donors with their community, with your community of land conservation. Show your donors how they're making an impact and help your donors connect the philanthropic dots. Fundraising is not about hounding people to give. It's about aligning people's deep desires for their community and the world with your solution. So I'd now like to open it up to questions. We have about 8 minutes. Any questions or comments? So Rick says our board debates whether to make the names of our contributors public or not. My feeling is not. I know some people might debate that. But, we're living in a world of, you know, identity theft. We're living in a world where there's a lot of concern of personal privacy. I do think at minimum, you should ask your donors whether or not they want their names listed publicly. Next week, Paul is going to talk about research and search engines, and you know, this is how those engines get the names. So obviously, as an insider in this work, I love the access to getting their names, but I'm not sure you're doing your donors any favors. And I think at a minimum, you should ask them whether or not they want to be listed. Ah, I love that. We find that offering volunteer work days are very popular with corporations. They bring their PR team and take lots of pics, and it helps us care for our properties. And it's also a great way for getting those volunteers more engaged. You can ask them if they would be willing to, uh, be on your email list and to sign up for your newsletters, and then they can actually become donors too. So I think it's an excellent way of engaging not only the corporation, but also engaging new donors. And, how you feed back to that corporation and those groups can be really significant. I mean, other ways that you can do is taking pictures, of people and sending those pictures back to them to just make sure that engagement becomes more personal and more connected and more sustainable. I love the idea of naming rights, a trail, a preserve, an acknowledgement on a sign of a particular donor's name. I do think before you do any naming rights, you have to have a naming rights policy, because naming rights have to be for a duration of period. Is it in perpetuity? Is it just for 10 years, 20 years? Someone said we let people sponsor properties for a set amount of years. Whatever you do, you have to have a policy that guides how you do this and the different levels that you will do it, because what you don't want is anyone to think that it's subjective. So you've got to put that in a very objective scenario and create a policy around your naming rights. And I love the sponsorship for a set amount of years. That's a great way of handling that. If you're not, and of course, if you're going into a capital campaign, then your naming rights will be kind of something totally different from that perspective. Anyone else? You can unmute yourselves and talk if you want. Anyone else have anything that they want to say? Any other questions?
I'll say that I thought it was very helpful. I took a lot of screenshots of your slides, and I'm going to share them with people. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, and we'll send you the deck so that you can have the whole thing.
Oh, even better.
Even better,
Thank you.
right? Thank you
Yeah,
for
but I,
taking
I
the
appreciate
screenshots,
it.
though.
You had lots of good ideas. Thank you.
Great, great. Anyone else? You all have stories in mind that you're thinking about?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on events and payment for events, giving people automatic membership to the land trust? So, we're getting to a point where we have events, and I feel like there are quite a few people taking advantage of this idea that they pay for the event and they get an automatic membership, and I feel like we might be losing some membership. But any experience or thoughts with that idea?
I take it from a donor focused approach, and donors feel they're giving to you through an event. And if a donor is giving to you, make them a member. Don't it's not like you're offering a museum membership. So if you're offering a membership to a museum, then you're getting specific, rights and benefits and perks, and it allows you so many entrances to the museum a year and all that kind of thing. You're not that kind of a membership. Your membership is really more of how you're raising money for your annual fund. So if you invite people to an event and you offer them that you have a membership for a period of 1 year, they appreciate that. And then they get your newsletters and then they learn more about you. And then you can send an annual appeal request out for them. I think a donor feels that if they give to you, they don't think that I'm an event donor or I'm a member donor or I'm an annual donor. I'm a donor. So my personal feeling, I know that there are some who might disagree with me, but I think for land trusts and for most of the land trusts I've worked with over the past 20 years, the membership really is more your vehicle for the annual fund, and there's more benefit to giving someone a membership than not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any thoughts on how to start a legacy program? Um, thank you so much, Jeanette. Legacy program, starting a legacy program should begin when you have a good track record of annual giving. When you have at least 60-65% retention, and you can look back on who's been giving to you, loyally for at least 10 years or more. Without that, you're kind of, spinning into the wind. And a legacy program needs time, attention, stewardship for it really to take hold. And so I would make sure you have a strong annual giving program, a strong retention and stewardship program, and then add on the legacy program. And it usually takes 2 or 3 years for that to build. There have been a lot of studies done over the years of legacy giving, and they really come from people who have given to you for 10, 15, 20 years or more, and usually small dollar amounts like, 10, 25, $50 a year. So they're not a major gift program. It's more of a loyalty that donors feel for you. So begin with your annual fund, get that really strong, get a good retention, and then build your legacy program on top of that. All right. Well, it's 11 o'clock. If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to stay a few minutes later. And thank you all for participating and being here this morning. And make sure you sign up for next week. Paul has a great presentation that he's going to give to you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you to everyone that signed up for today. We will be using the same link for next week's webinar. So if you are registered for this one, you're registered for next week. I'll send out a reminder email. But also be sure to share it with other folks in your organization that might be interested. Thank you all and look forward to
Thank
seeing you.
you. Thank
Thank you.
you.